Good morning, boys and girls. Today is Tuesday, and unfortunately, I won't be able to meet with you for math today because we are going to be meeting live in our religion class. So that means today's assignment is going to be for you to take notes on things that we didn't finish yesterday in our live class for math, and then complete the assignment that is given for the day. So if you can remember, yesterday when we were all together, we started to talk about the different properties that are in the multiplication properties that are located in the math world. There are 5 of them. Yesterday when we were together, we talked about these 2 specific ones. We talked about the commutative property of multiplication, which is changing the order of the factors does not change the product. And the example that we have below helps us to see that. These are our factors and this is our product. We can flip-flop the order and it doesn't change things. And then we also talked about the associative property of multiplication, which tells us that we can take these parentheses, these groupings, and we can move those around also. As long as everything in the problem is multiplication, we're going to end up with the same product at the end. So even though we change those groupings around, it doesn't change the product. One of our classes may have reached the 3rd property, which was the identity property of multiplication, but I believe there were 2 classes who didn't get this far. So for those of you, this could be new information right here. So as I go through this today, what I want you to do is at any point in time as you're watching this video, feel free to pause it so that you can get the notes down that you need. You should have your notebook with you and ready to take notes for today's class, even though I'm not live with you. I want you to feel as though I am there taking the notes as you go through it today on this video. So the identity property of multiplication, this property tells us that the product of 1 and a number is the same as that number. And some of this might feel a little bit familiar to you all because you may have heard of an identity property of addition, but for the identity property of multiplication, this is where we look at a number and we know that if we multiply 1 and another number, that the product is going to become that other number. And as I shared with the class yesterday, one way to kind of help your brain to remember this, because I know that a lot of times in math we play with numbers, but sometimes we do have to memorize information and definitions and vocabulary words. And these properties are never going to go away. These are things that you're going to see in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So this property, one way to kind of help you to maybe remember that this is the identity property, if you look at the letter I right here, this letter sort of has the number 1 inside of it. This is the property in multiplication that always uses the number 1. So maybe that little trick will kind of help your brain to remember that that is the identity property. So here's an example of what that means. This is where if I were to take a number, any number, like in this example, it's the number 8. If I multiply it by a number 1, the product is still 8. So as you can see, it is that other number. And I can reverse those factors. I can have a 1 times an 8, and I'm still going to get the product that's going to be an 8. Okay? So again, I know that I'm moving kind of quickly, but that's because this is a recording. So at any point in time, if you need to stop this video so that you can get these notes down and make sure that you understand what it is that I'm saying, that's important to do so. Okay? The 4th property that we are going to move into now is the property called the 0 property of multiplication. So this one's new. This one, we haven't seen this one before, but it kind of is self-explanatory. It kind of explains itself just in its title. The 0 property of multiplication tells us that anytime we multiply a number by 0, the product is going to be 0. Now this is different with addition, because anytime we take a number and we add it to 0, our answer is always going to be that other number. That's kind of what that identity property was telling us a minute ago. But when we're in multiplication, this is reverse. So that means if I take a number and I multiply it by a 0, the end result is not going to be that other number like it is in the identity property, but it's going to be 0. So my example for this one would be something like this. So 12 times 0 is going to be equal to 0. Or if I reverse my factors in this example over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that my end result is still a 0. And those are the properties. That is the 0 property of multiplication. So at this point, we've covered 4 different properties. We've covered the commutative, the associative, the identity, and now the zero. And if you remember, I said from the very start, we have 5 properties that we have to cover. So our 5th and final property that we have to go into is the property called the distributive property of multiplication. And this is one that you're going to see a whole lot, probably one that you're going to see more than some of the other properties, just because when we start getting into order of operations, the distributive property is real important and it's used a lot. So the distributive property of multiplication, if we look at what this property tells us, it tells us a little more lengthy information, but it tells us that when the same factor is distributed across 2 addends, the product does not change. Now, right now, I know that those words might feel somewhat confusing, but if you know in that definition that there are words in there that you know what they mean, like the word factor. A factor is a number I use for multiplication. Distributed kind of means to pass out. You share. So it's kind of like we're going to share some of these numbers across 2 different forms of math. When we look at add-ins, it looks like we're looking at numbers that involve adding. So let's check this out and see an example of what exactly this would mean. So here's a good example that explains what this distributive property tells us. So if you notice over here on the left side of the page, we have a 6, that's our factor, and we're multiplying it by a 2 plus a 5. These are what we call our add-ins. So that helps to explain what this part of the definition was all about. So as we know with order of operations, we have to do what's inside the parentheses first. But let's look at what's on the opposite side of the equal sign next, okay? I didn't mean to move that, sorry. On this side of the equal sign, I now see that I have taken my number that was my factor and I've now put it into a parenthesis with another number. So now that 2 has become a factor. And so I'm taking 6 times 2, which are both factors, and I'm going to add them to another group, which is 6 times 5, which also is 2 factors. So if you notice on this side over here, I'm going to end up with a product plus another product, because a product is the answer to a multiplication problem. Over here, I'm going to end up with a sum, because that's what I get when I do this parenthesis first, a sum that I have to multiply by a factor. Okay, so if we break this down, here's what this looks like. All right, so let's work what's inside the parentheses first. If I have 2 plus 5, that's where my 7 comes from. So again, if I'm showing you this and you're feeling a little bit confused, since we're not live, you need to pause the video and you need to kind of take a minute to let this sink into your brain so that it makes sense to you. Once we've done what's in the parentheses, we can bring down the other stuff that's left. The multiplication sign hasn't been used yet, and the 6 hasn't been used. So this is the stuff that is left in the problem. Let's move on to the opposite side. So this is the side that had us doing stuff a little bit different. This time I had to multiply these factors, and when I did 6 times 2, I got my 12. That's where my 12 down here came from. But I had another set of parentheses over here, so that meant I had to do some more multiplication before I could finish this problem. So I had 6 times 5. 6 times 5, when I multiply that out, I get 30. Hopefully you're starting to see now why I was saying your multiplication facts and knowing them is really important in this chapter, because we can't multiply big numbers if we can't multiply the small numbers first. So now we still haven't reached the finish line of this problem. We have to figure out, okay, what is it that we're going to do next? So now the last and final step is going to be to finish what's on that side. So as you see over here, 6 times 7, if I multiply correctly, that tells me that the product of that is 42. If I look on the opposite side, I don't see any multiplication anymore. That's gone. But now I see an addition problem. Those are called add-ins. So I have 2 numbers that I'm going to add together. If I add 30 and 12 together, I still end up with 42. That's pretty cool stuff. So that's part of how math works. If you do math in the right order, it will give you the same product. And that's what the distributive property tells us, that we have to learn to do things in the right order. And that's why I said you're going to see the distributive property a lot when we start getting into order of operations. And those are your 5 different properties that go with multiplication. So at this point, here's what I want you to do. I have some practice problems for you. So this would be where you're going to take a pause. Once you have a chance to look at all of them, you're going to pause your video and you're going to work through them. And then when you come back to me, we're going to talk about what these answers are. So if you look at this particular problem, you have 4 of them available to you. So I want you to look at those 4, and I want you to take a minute and I want you to work those out and see what property this goes with, because notice the directions. The directions say name the property. So you don't really have to figure out the answer for these as much as know what property this matches. Okay, so if you need to pause your video at this point, go ahead and take a pause and then come right back once you've had a chance to kind of work through those and figure out which property matches the ones that you see displayed. Now that you've come back together, this is where, if we look through and we check to see how you have done for problem number 1, you should have noticed that this matches the associative property. This is where we learned we can move our groups around and we still have the same product. For number 2, you should have identified this one as the 0 property. This is the one that tells us that if I multiply a number by a 0, my end result will always be a 0. My third one, this is the commutative property. This one tells us that we can change our factors around. It doesn't necessarily matter the order that I do them in, and my end result, the product, is going to stay the same. And then for problem number 4, you should have identified this one as the distributive property. This is the one that tells us we can have some multiplication and some addition, and as long as we do things in the right order, the product stays the same. So now that I feel like you kind of are getting that, let's look at something new. And again, if you need more time, go ahead and pause to get yourself into where you're ready to move on, okay? All right. Before you're given your assignment that you're going to be working on today, there's some more practice that I'm giving you here. So there's going to be an example today in your work that you're going to have to do where you're going to have to complete the number sentence to show the given property. So for this one, I've left a little bit of stuff out. So for example, for problem number 1, I'm telling you that this is the identity property. So I want you to tell me what's missing in that problem. And then what can I fill in those empty spaces that would make this show the identity property? So for example, we'll do this one together. If you're looking at problem number 1, hopefully you see that if I am looking at the identity property, and I've got to remember, what's the identity property? So if I need to go back to my notes for help, that's why we take those notes. I can find them in my notebook and help me to remember. But the identity property is the one that uses number 1. And hopefully, because you have that little trick that I tried to help you with that letter I and using the letter I to help you think of the number 1, you would realize that the missing stuff in this problem is going to be the number 1. So you would answer this by putting a 1 on the line, and then you would answer that equation and say 12 times 1 is equal to 12. So that's how you're going to work these particular problems here. We did that one together, but as you can see, there's number 2, there's number 3, there's number 4, and there's number 5. So you're going to have to kind of move a little bit through the video as you are, answering some of these problems up above. So again, pause the video so you can work through them and figure out these missing numbers, and then come back to me once you feel like that completely makes sense to you, okay? Now, hopefully, you have had a lot of practice with this. Hopefully you feel pretty comfortable now in identifying properties and knowing what these properties are. So here's your activity for today. Today, I want you to complete workbook page 31 and 32. This is an assignment that's going to match what we did yesterday in class as well as today through this lesson. So you're going to complete both of those pages. This is going to be due tomorrow, which is going to be Wednesday, in your Google Classroom. So Wednesday's not really a school day. It's a day that we had off on our calendar, so we won't have any class, but I'm giving you until Wednesday late at night, so 11:59, that would be the last minute of Wednesday, for you to turn in this workbook page assignment. And because we're not together, and you know I always love having your stuff given to me, it just helps me to see your work better. But since I can't be with you, everybody's going to have to turn this in the Google Classroom tomorrow. Just please make sure that when you upload this, I can really see what your answers are, because sometimes it gets difficult, as you all know, in those pictures for me to read it. If you can read it, then just know I can read it. But if you upload it and it's hard for you to see it, it's probably going to be hard for me to see it also, okay? And if you ever have trouble loading things into Google Classroom, you can always email it to me also, and I'll get it that way, okay? So that's your first assignment. However, as we started talking about yesterday in our Google Meet, we're going to start making IXL more of a responsibility for us. So as you notice in this green down here, I have given you another assignment for IXL, but this is not due until the end of the week, and the week doesn't end until Sunday. So you have to complete 30 minutes of IXL for this week. Now, some of you were probably just working on IXL yesterday because that was something you didn't finish before class started yesterday. And so that was an NTI assignment that was given last week. So for some of you, you could be a little bit behind and you feel like you're doing a lot of IXL this week. But remember that IXL was actually for last week. It wasn't for this week. This week's IXL is to complete 30 minutes. So today is Tuesday. So you have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's actually 6 days. And I know some of those are not school days. Some of those are actually holidays. I know you're going to be traveling and you're going to be with families. But if you took just 5 minutes a day, you only have to do 5 minutes a day. By Sunday, you would have 30 minutes finished. So I don't think that's asking too much for you to just take 5 minutes and work a little bit of math before Sunday arrives. And again, you don't have to do 5 minutes a day. If you want to just do it for 2 days and do 15 minutes for each day, that works also, as long as you have 30 minutes finished by the end of the week. Now, this red information down here at the bottom tells you that I'm going to check your IXL minutes on Sunday to make sure that you completed what was due to me. This will be a classwork grade. So if you do 30 minutes, then you will get your 100%. If you go above those 30 minutes, then you will get 5 extra bonus points. So you will get an extra 5 points. So you could get up to 105. But for those of you who are missing minutes and don't complete those minutes, then points will be taken off of your grade because you didn't get those minutes finished for the week. And remember, this is so important, guys. Once you log into your Google Classroom, it's going to have you, and you get into your Clever account, it's going to have you already set to grade 5. But in case you aren't sure, when you get into IXL, you'll see alphabet letters on the left side of the page. 5th grade is letter G. So you'll just want to use letter G to go into. And then all the stuff that's in letter G is 5th grade stuff. So I want you to go to the multiplication category, and I want you to choose something under that category. But remember, the further down you go in that category, the harder the multiplication is going to get. So you might want to just start with the first category, and then when you maybe finish that category or that, little subcategory, then go to the next thing under multiplication. But if you just start randomly picking, you might end up doing some multiplication that could be a little bit too challenging and too tough. So don't work on having to master that little section that you're in, because IXL is designed to be somewhat tough for you. So if you're working on it and you're getting a whole bunch right, and you've done 60 questions and you got all of them right, and you still haven't reached 100% and mastering it, and you miss the very next one, it's going to drop you down and say, oh, you need more work because you missed one. So it's not about missing things, it's just about practice. So I just want you worrying. Don't worry about the score, worry about the minutes. If it says you have worked for 30 minutes and you're in the middle, then stop. You don't have to do any more. I know some of you worked for like 50 minutes or for an hour. If you're doing that because you enjoy it and you like it, then that's great. But you don't have to do that for me. I want you to just do the 30 minutes for the week and then call it a day and say that you're finished. Okay. So just to review, now that you have gotten all of lesson 1 finished, you have to complete workbook page 31 and 32. This is due to me tomorrow. And then you have the rest of the week to get your IXL minutes in before Sunday night. I hope all of you have a super, super, super happy Thanksgiving. I know it's so sad that we're not together. I'm going to miss seeing all of you. I wish we could be. We would have done a little fun turkey activity, but I just want you to have time with your families, be safe, have fun, eat lots of yummy food, and think about Miss Malone and maybe say a little prayer for people that maybe aren't with you with all this COVID stuff going around. I'll see you again on Monday next week once Thanksgiving is over, and we'll rock back in to our math and things that we have to do next week. Bye, guys.